spiritual community of SSUC, we each come in our essentialness, being who we are and being where we find ourselves, whether we're celebrating or whether we're grieving, whether we're hopeful or discouraged, peaceful or anxious, serene or mad as hell. Wherever we find ourselves and in all the shades in between. We invite each other into the friendship of this circle to find love and hope and joy and peace. And so we sing our invitation to one another. We welcome the light of a new morning, our turning toward our great day star. And we come in the gift of a new day, seeking to turn our lives into light. And we come grieving the lives of those whose death has seemed to extinguish their light. Yesterday in this circle we celebrated the long and good life of Bob Jordan. And next Sunday afternoon in this circle we will celebrate the long and good light we've known in Jack McCracken. Our circle has been reshaped by their deaths. By the death of each one we lose from our lives. And while it seems as though death ends our light, it actually extends our light into those who take up our song, and those who receive our story, and those who live forward into the light we cast. So we light this candle in our midst today, receiving the gift of light in our lives. The light of the long story to which we belong, and the light we find in each other's eyes, and the light we receive from those whose death does not extinguish our love nor their light. And as we receive this light in our midst this morning, we sing an affirmation with and to one another. One we share at the end of every memorial service in speech, and today we offer it with each other in song, as we affirm to one another that we are held safe in the undying light of love.
Safe in the undying light of love. Safe in the undying light of love. Safe in the undying light of love. Safe in the undying light of love. All our laughter, all our grief, all our stories, all our joy, the one we now remember, the ones for whom we care. Safe in the undying light of love. Safe in the undying light of love. Safe in the undying light of love. Safe in the undying light of love.
In the great circle of life. In living this new day, a day we've never seen before. In the persistence of every being to make its life. And in the resilience of the human spirit. In the midst of the strength of who we are together. And in the sacredness we call by so many different names. And with one another, we offer these words of prayer as a way of strengthening our intention to live more deeply, more faithfully, more true to ourselves, more true to the highest humanity we have within us. Into this circle we come, seeking to open to the wisdom of our stories. We gather to inspire one another, to live in ways that make a difference and reflect our highest values. May we see, hear, touch, taste, smell, and sense the sacredness that is all around us. May we open to our storied lives, move to shoulder one another's burdens, share each other's joys, empower one another to live with love, respect, trust, and honor. May it be so.
It was the height of cruelty to talk about stories and not read one. They all wanted me to read these stories I had. I reserved it for now. Now we're going to have a story. This story is called The Old Man and the Very Little Boy. And it's by Christine Franklin with illustrations by Tereya Schaefer. Once there was an old man. His hair was the color of the clouds. His face was wrinkled and as brown as the deep garden soil. His feet were tough and wide, and his old toes spread like stubby fingers because he'd always walked barefoot wherever he went. Each morning when the sun made enough light to warm his bones, the old man sat on a stump and waited. The women of the village passed him on their way to dig in their gardens. "Will the rains come soon, old father?" asked a young woman in a loud voice. The old man closed his eyes and nodded wisely. "Soon it will rain," shouted the woman with great smiles. They walked down the trail, singing about sunshine and rain and all the things that make life good. The young men gathered to sharpen their spears. They chanted magic spells and sang hunting songs, and though the old man knew all the spells and all the songs, he kept silent. "Will we find food, old father?" asked one young man. The old man closed his eyes and nodded wisely. "Full bellies tonight," shouted the young men. They left for the forest singing about their sharp spears and roasted meat and all the things that make life good. "Good morning, old father," said a bright little voice. To the old man, it sounded like the twittering of a bird. "Good morning, old father," said the voice a little louder. And the old man knew who it was. It was a very little boy who came to sit with him every day. "Mother sent this," said the boy as he unfolded a banana leaf, and inside was a roasted sweet potato. The old man ate the potato slowly. Most of his teeth were gone. He licked his fingers one by one and politely smacked his lips when he was done. Each day began like this. "Tell me a story," the little boy begged in a loud voice. For the old man could scarcely hear. The old man smiled a wide, toothless grin and closed his eyes. "When I was young and proud," he always began, and his voice was as dry as the dust. He told the same tale again and again. But the little boy never grew tired of them. The old man told stories of hunting and bravery and the sweetness of love. The little boy danced in the dirt before him. "Ay, ay, ay, yip, yip, yip," he yelled as he whirled and hopped and threw sticks at a tree. The old man smiled sweetly and remembered many things. "Were you ever a little boy, old father?" the little boy asked one day. The old man laughed a crackly laugh. "Come close," he whispered. The little boy leaned over and listened. The old man thumped his chest with a leathery fist. "Inside this old man," he said, "lives a very little boy." The little boy laughed and laughed. It was the funniest thing he'd ever heard. The old man laughed too, until one silver tear trickled down his wrinkled cheek. Soon the sun plunged toward the western horizon, and the little boy's mother came for him. "Good night, old father," said the little boy. "Tomorrow we'll laugh again." "Tomorrow," said the old man, "you will be too old to sit with me." The little boy laughed as he walked down the trail with his mother. He knew he would never be old. Around and around the seasons danced, wet and dry and wet and dry. The old man and very little boy laughed and sang and chanted spells together, and the boy grew like a banana tree. Then one day the boy's father gave him a spear of his very own. "Today you will hunt with the men," said his father. "See my beautiful spear," shouted the boy as he passed the old man on the way to the forest. The old man smiled and nodded wisely. From that time on, the boy saw his friend every morning before the hunt, but he did not sit with the old man again. One gray, rainy day, the old man died. and rested with the others who had died before him. At first the boy missed the old man, but the seasons chased each other as they always had, and he forgot his friend. The boy learned to throw a spear and shoot an arrow, and soon he was a young man. The young man hunted and danced with the other young men and told stories by the fire each night. When it was time to take a wife, he chose the finest girl in the village, and the finest girl in the village chose him. The seasons changed twice, and their first child was born. Then many seasons passed, and there were many, many children, and the man was proud and brave, and his life was good. Many more years passed, and one day the man left the hunting to the younger man, for he wanted only to sit on the old stump and warm himself in the sun. And soon the little boys gathered at his feet. "A story, old father, a story," the littlest boy cried, and the old man placed the boy on the stump beside him. "When I was young and proud," he began, and the boys were quiet, and the smooth breeze carried his old voice across the village as he told tales of hunts and battles and songs of bravery and love. "Were you ever a little boy?" asked the littlest boy. The old man chuckled and coughed and slapped his bare legs with both hands. "I will tell you a secret," he whispered. And the little boys gathered near to listen. Inside this old man is a very little boy. The boys laughed and laughed. Their mouths were wide open with joy. "You were old yesterday and the day before yesterday," said one of the little boys. "You're the oldest man we know." "We see your wrinkled face," said one boy. "We see your rough hands," said another boy. "We see your wide feet." "You've been old for a long time," said the littlest boy. "You've been old forever." The old man grinned a toothless grin and shook his finger at the boys. "Tomorrow," he said, "you will understand. Tomorrow you will be old men just like me." The little boys laughed and laughed as they danced in the dirt. They knew they'd never be old. The old man laughed too, until one silver tear trickled down his wrinkled cheek, and with a crooked finger he wiped away the tear and smiled and remembered many things. Deep within his old heart, a very little boy was dancing in the dirt. This is the insight of a contemporary writer. May we find wisdom for our living.
I want to share a small snippet from a book called Becoming Wise, an inquiry into the mystery and art of living. It's a collection of reflections by Krista Tippett. And if you have had occasion to listen to National Public Radio, the program On Being, Krista Tippett is the host of that program and conducts countless interviews with fascinating individuals. And her book is a collection of some of the wisdom of the stories and conversations she's had with so many different people over her experience of this program. One of those individuals was a woman by the name of Rachel Naomi Riemann. Some of you will have read her work. She is a professor of family and community medicine, a practitioner of integrative medicine, teaches at the University of California, San Francisco. And from their conversation, these are some thoughts that emerged from Rachel Naomi Riemann. Rachel's words shifted the way I move through the world. She began in her conversation by challenging the nature of cancer treatment and later the content of medical education. with her realization that every illness has a story attached. A person's given a diagnosis of cancer or diabetes or heart disease, but the details of a person's life make every cancer or diabetes or heart disease different, and every course of healing unique. As Rachel Naomi Riemann was ruminating about the spiritual roots of her life, she told me about her Hasidic rabbi grandfather and a story called The Birthday of the World, the story behind the evocative, demanding Jewish teaching to repair the world. And this is what Rachel Naomi Riemann said. It was my 4th birthday present, this story, given to me by my grandfather. He told me in the beginning there was only holy darkness, the Ein Sof, the source of life. In the course of history, at a moment of time, this world, the world of 1,000 things, emerged from the heart of holy darkness as a great ray of light. And then, perhaps because this is a Jewish story, there was an accident. And the vessels containing the light of the world, the wholeness of the world, broke. The wholeness of the world, the light of the world, was scattered into 1,000 fragments of light. And they fell into all the events and all the people where they remained deeply hidden until this very day. Now, according to my grandfather, the whole human race is a response to this accident. We're here because we're born with the capacity to find hidden light in all events and all people, to lift it up and make it visible again, and thereby restore the innate wholeness of the world. It's a very important story for our time. This task is called Tikkun Olam in Hebrew. It's the restoration of the world. And this, of course, is a collective task. It involves all the people who've ever been, all the people who are presently alive, all the people who are yet to be born. We're all healers of the world. That story opens a sense of possibility. It's not about healing the world by making a huge difference. It's about healing the world that touches you, that's around you. Important knowledge is passed, she says, through stories. It's what holds a culture together. Culture has a story, and every person participates in that story. The world is made up of stories. It's not made up of facts, she says. Well, the facts are the bones of the story, if you want to think of it that way. But the world is made up of stories. And no one's story is ever finished. This is our human experience. We live in a world of stories, and a world of stories lives in us. And by our stories, we make our world. Once upon a time, there were 4 children whose names were Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, and they stepped through a closet to discover the world of a lion, a witch, and a wardrobe. Or once upon a time, there was a child named Dorothy who lived in Kansas, who will find herself in the company of a cowardly lion, a tin man, and a scarecrow on her way to the wizard. Or once upon a time, Kitchi Manitou decided to purify the earth, and through the work of the muskrat and the turtle, a new continent was formed. Or once upon a time, there was an old man and a very little boy. Once upon a time, someone was traveling from Jerusalem to Jericho and fell among thieves. Once upon a time, a man had 2 sons, and the younger said to his father, "Give me my share." Once upon a time, a woman with 10 coins lost one. Once upon a time, a sower went out into his field to sow, and he planted. In the best of fields and the worst of fields, in the best of conditions and the worst of conditions, in the best of times and the worst of times, in fertile soil and in stony soil. But it wasn't just once upon a time. It's over and over and over again in time. Again and again, in every culture and in every generation, we tell stories of once upon a time when there was a character who made a mistake and tried something new, or who encountered a crisis and who in some way stumbles into an adventure, who travels to a far country and he meets many obstacles and challenges, and she returns changed by those experiences to make a difference in the world in which she lives. These are our stories. They're stories that never happened and stories that always happen. They're stories that shine light into our shadows, showing us who we are and how we're to live and how we might make sense of our lives. And we tell each other these stories not because something strange and wonderful happened once upon a time, but because these stories help us know the truth of our lives in our own time. We find ourselves within each character, within each far-fetched quest, within the insights and the experiences that bring these characters home in new ways. Because stories are among our finest teachers. It's one of the great gifts we've been receiving from our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. Indigenous peoples of every land, Indigenous peoples of this land, are rooted in a storytelling culture. From the strength of this storytelling culture, we're learning that the best stories resist telling us what to think, and they lure us into thinking, into making meaning, into feeling, into finding our way for ourselves. Wisdom teachers like Jesus of Nazareth must have learned this from the power of stories in the Semitic storytelling culture that shaped him too. In one of the Gospels, Matthew's Gospel, it goes so far as to say Jesus always spoke to the crowds in parables. He didn't lecture or preach. He didn't develop a system. He told stories. He didn't design 7 easy steps to anything. He told stories about ordinary people doing ordinary things. Stories that subverted conventional wisdom and brought new insight. Stories that suggested new possibilities for ways of being in the world, ways of seeing the world. Stories that turned things upside down and invited us and the first listeners to question our assumptions and to hear something deeper about ourselves. Just like that story of the old man makes us realize that someone hasn't always been at the stage of life in which we meet them. That we are the sum of our many experiences, and that we pass those experiences to others to help them make sense of their lives. And we never outgrow the child within us. The best of stories resist being reduced into a simple moral or a singular meaning, because the best of stories, like one of the children told us, come to us again and again, and we see and hear them differently each time. The best of stories refuse to define a truth, but invite us to discover truth. The best of stories refuse to make a point and insist on being the point. They point to some truth about you or me or this storied world we find ourselves in. And maybe we tell stories because we are stories. We're a story that begins in an inexplicable explosion of light. We're stories of particles and waves, of collisions and fusions, of attractions and separations, of births and deaths, of innovations and failures, of adaptation and survival, of complexity and change, because we belong to the story of life. We're children, finding our way through the closet or finding our way into the forest. We're traveling the road from Jerusalem to Jericho and falling among thieves and passing the injured and caring for the enemy. We're children and the parent and the one who leaves home and the one who can't leave home and the one who celebrates reconciliation. We're planting seeds in whatever kind of soil we find beneath our feet. We're sweeping our house in search of something valuable we've lost track of. And everyone has a story. If we know one another's backstory, we see one another differently. Everyone has a story that isn't finished when breath is done. We all carry the story of our ancestors and of the stars and scars that shape our values and our sensitivities, and we leave our stories behind like seeds a sower planted. Some will flower, some will be dormant for a few generations, some will survive for generations. And in the midst of whatever story we're writing in this moment with our lives, we're always being invited into the unknown beyond the wardrobe. Being invited to discover again the courage and the compassion and the creativity that isn't the wizard's to give. It's found along that yellow brick road we're walking together. It's found within us. It's found in the wisdom of our stories, where we're learning our truth is always partial, and we're looking to one another, to those who've gone before us and those who are coming behind us. We're listening for the stories that help each of us find our way home through the forest, through the far country, through the wilderness. This is a time for us to pause and consider the stories we're telling and the stories we're living. They're our compass and our map. And they're the seed we plant for those who will take up our story. In these few moments of quiet we have with each other, I invite us to think about the story that's helping us to find our way just now, to find our way home.